The testimony of Second Officer Charles Herbert Lightoller was taken before the Senate Subcommittee on Friday, April 19th, 1912. Mr. Lightoller, where do you reside?
Netley Abbey, Hampshire.
England?
England.
What is your business?
Seaman.
How long have you been in that service or employment?
13 years and 3 months.
How much service have you seen, and in what capacity?
In all capacities in the White Star Service, 4th, 3rd, 2nd and 1st Officer.
What position do you occupy now?
2nd Officer of the Titanic.
When did you go aboard the Titanic?
In Belfast, March 19th or 20th.
Did you make the so-called trial trips?
Yes, sir.
Of what did they consist?
Turning circles and adjusting compasses.
What condition was the weather when you made this trial test?
Light breeze, clear weather, sir.
From the time you boarded the Titanic, did you at any time encounter any rough water?
No, sir.
Does that include up to the time of this collision?
Yes, sir.
What was the maximum speed of this boat?
I could not say, sir. She was never put, up to my knowledge, to her maximum speed.
What did you understand it to be?
About 22.5 to 23 knots.
From whom did you get that information?
General rumour, sir.
How much time was spent in the test?
I could not say exactly.
Approximately.
About 5 hours.
Would you think, from what you observed in the movements of the ship, that it was going pretty fast?
A fair speed.
What would you call real good speed?
When the ship was built, we only expected her to go 21 knots, therefore, all over 21 we thought very good.
Do you know who was aboard the Titanic in these test trials?
A great number. I know some of them.
Please state those that you know.
Captain Smith, Mr. Murdoch, Chief Officer, myself, Mr. Blair, 2nd Officer, Mr. Pittman, 3rd Officer, Mr. Boxthall, 4th Officer, Mr. Lowe, 5th Officer, Mr. Moody, 6th Officer, and Mr. Andrews of Harland and Wolff.
Was Mr. Ismay aboard?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
After the final test, what was done with the boat?
We proceeded toward Southampton.
Immediately?
Almost immediately after taking on board a few things that had been left behind which were required for the completion of the ship.
Was the life-saving equipment complete?
Yes, sir.
Of what did it consist?
The necessary number of lifeboats.
I wish you would say how that is determined, if you can.
By the number of people on board.
Do you not know how many there are on board until you're ready to start?
No, sir.
Is it determined by the number of accommodations rather than by the number of people who get aboard?
There must be life-saving apparatus for everyone on board, regardless of accommodations.
Yes, but what I desire to know is whether in each stateroom on each deck in all classes, whether there is any rule, and whether it is followed at the time, so far as you know, in equipping this boat with life preservers and life belts, and anything else that might appropriately go into the rooms and be upon the decks of a boat of that character.
She was perfectly complete throughout, sir.
Was a test of the lifeboats made before you sailed for Southampton?
All the gear was tested.
Were the lifeboats lowered?
Yes, sir.
Under whose orders?
The officers. Principally my orders.
Under your orders?
Yes.
Tell what was done.
All the boats on the ship were swung out, and those that I required were lowered down as far as I wanted them, some all the way down and some dropped into the water.
What was done when you reached Southampton?
We shipped coal, provisions, cargo was taken on board, past the Board of Trade tests and survey.
Did some British officer make the Board of Trade test?
the Southampton Board of Trade officer.
What did he do?
He carried out the requisite tests required by the British Board of Trade.
Did you accompany him?
Yes, I was with him part of the time.
How much time did he spend when he was with you?
About 4 hours.
How thorough are they about it?
Speaking of Captain Clark, we call him a nuisance because he's so strict.
In what respect is he a nuisance?
Because he makes us fork out every detail.
Do you mean by that he would call attention to the absence of tools, implements, and devices necessary for the ship's full equipment?
No, sir. He would insist upon them all being absolutely brought out on deck every time.
I wish you would describe a life belt.
It consists of a series of pieces of cork. Allow me to show you by illustration. A hole is cut there for the head to go through and falls over front and back, and there are tapes from the back then tied around the front. It's a new idea and very effective because no one can make a mistake in putting it on.
Have you ever had one of these on?
Yes, sir.
Have you ever been into the sea with one of them?
Yes, sir.
Where?
From the Titanic.
In this recent collision?
Yes, sir.
How long were you in the sea with a lifebelt on?
Between half an hour and an hour.
What time did you leave the ship?
I didn't leave it.
Did the ship leave you?
Yes, sir.
Did you stay until the ship had departed entirely?
Yes, sir.
I wish you would tell us whether the suction incidental to the sinking of this vessel was a great deterrent in making progress away from the boat.
It was hardly noticeable.
Were the lifeboats gone when you found yourself without footage?
All except one.
Where was that one?
In the tackles, trying to get it over.
Who was managing these tackles?
The first officer, Mr. Murdoch.
He lost his life?
Yes.
Did you see Mr. Ismay at that time?
No, sir.
Did you at any time?
Yes, sir.
Where?
On the boat deck.
How long before she sunk?
At first, before we started the boats, when we started to uncover the boats.
How long was that after the collision?
About 20 minutes.
Do you know where the captain was at that time?
I could not say, sir.
Did you see him on the bridge?
Previous to that, I had seen him on the bridge.
How long before that?
About 3 minutes after the collision.
Did you believe the boat was in danger?
No, sir.
What was the force of the impact?
A slight jar and a grinding sound.
From front or side?
Well, naturally, I should think it was in front, whether I could tell or not.
Was there a noise?
Very little.
Did you go back to your room under the impression that the boat had not been injured?
Yes, sir.
You knew that there had been a collision.
Not necessarily a collision.
You knew you had struck something.
Yes, sir.
What did you assume it to be?
Ice.
Why?
Well, that was the conclusion one naturally jumps to around the banks there.
Did you know of the wireless message from the America to the Titanic warning you that you were in the vicinity of icebergs?
From the America to the Titanic?
Yes.
I cannot say that I saw that individual message.
Would you have heard of it?
Most probably, sir.
In fact, it would have been the duty of the person receiving this message to communicate it to you, for you were in charge of the ship?
Under the commander's orders, sir.
But you received no communication of that kind?
I do not know whether I received the Americas. I knew that a communication had come from some ship. I cannot say that it was the America.
Giving the latitude and longitude of those icebergs?
speaking of the icebergs and naming their longitude.
Just tell us, if anything, what did you hear about that, and from whom, if you can?
From the captain.
That night?
Yes.
At what time did you get that information?
I think it was that afternoon.
Who succeeded you as officer of the ship?
The first officer, Mr. Murdoch.
Did you communicate to him this information that the captain had given you on the bridge?
I communicated that when I was receiving him at 1 o'clock.
What did you tell him?
Exactly what was in the telegram.
How fast was the boat going at that time?
About 21.5 or 22.
Was that her maximum speed?
I do not know, sir. I could not say, sir.
You wanted her to go as fast as she could?
At some time or other, yes. Naturally, we talked. We wondered what her maximum speed would eventually be.
You were anxious to see it tested?
Not necessarily anxious.
Interested, however.
Interested? Yes.
Was the lookout increased that evening after you took the watch?
No, sir.
What was the complement of your ship that night in officers?
Myself and 2 juniors.
Were you at all apprehensive about your proximity to these icebergs?
No, sir.
And for that reason you did not think it necessary to increase the official lookout?
No, sir.
From 6 until 10 o'clock, was the captain on the bridge at all?
Yes, sir.
When did he arrive?
5 minutes to 9.
When he came to the bridge at 5 minutes to 9, what did he say to you, or what did you say to him?
We spoke about the weather, calmness of the sea, about the time we should be getting up to the vicinity of the ice and how we should recognize it if we should see it, freshening up our minds as to the indications that ice gives of its proximity. We just conferred together generally for 25 minutes.
Was there any reference made at that time to the wireless message from the America?
Captain Smith made a remark that if it was in a slight degree hazy, there would be no doubt we should have to go very slowly.
Did you slow up?
That I do not know, sir.
Then did he leave the bridge?
Yes, sir.
When did you next see the captain?
When I came out of the quarters after the impact.
When did you last see the captain?
On the boat deck, sir.
How long before the vessel sank?
I could not say, sir. I saw him about the boat deck 2 or 3 times I had the occasion to go to him.
Tell us as nearly as you can just where you saw the captain last with reference to the sinking of the ship.
I think the bridge was the last place I saw him, sir. I'm not sure. I think he was crossing the bridge. No, sir, just coming across the bridge. I merely recognized a glimpse. I have a slight recollection of having seen him whilst I was walking.
What were the last orders you heard him give?
When I asked him, "Shall I put the women and children in the boats?" he replied, "Yes, and lower away." Those were the last orders he gave.
What did you do then?
I carried out his orders.
What about this one boat that could not be lowered?
They were all lowered, with the exception of one, the last boat, which was stowed on top of the officers' quarters. We had not time to launch it, nor yet to open it.
Well, what happened to that boat?
It floated off the ship.
Without anyone in it?
I understand the men standing on top, who assisted to launch it down, jumped onto it as it was on the deck and floated off with it.
What type of boat was it?
Collapsible.
Did you see it afterwards?
Eventually. It was the boat that I got on.
Eventually that was the boat that you got on?
Yes, sir. Bottom up.
Was the vessel sinking pretty rapidly at that time?
Pretty quickly, sir.
Do you know any of the men that were in the water as you were and who boarded this lifeboat?
Yes, sir.
Give their names.
Mr. Thayer, a first-class passenger. The second Marconi officer, I can tell you his name in a minute, Bride.
Was that the boat that Colonel Gracie?
Oh, yes, and Colonel Gracie.
Was he on the upturned boat before you got it righted round?
We never righted it.
Who took command of that overturned lifeboat?
I did, as far as command was necessary.
So altogether, there were how many lifeboats actually used?
19.
How many actually picked up by the Carpathia?
All accounted for.
Who determined the number of people who should go into the lifeboats?
I did.
How did you reach a conclusion as to the number that should be permitted to go in?
My own judgment about the strength of the tackle.
How many did you put in each boat?
In the first boat, I put about 20 or 25.
How many men?
No men.
As a matter of fact, it was not much more than half loaded, was it?
You mean its floating capacity?
Yes.
Floating capacity? No.
How did it happen that you did not put more people into that boat?
Because I did not consider it safe.
In a great emergency like that, where there were limited facilities, could you not have afforded to try to put more people into that boat?
I did not know it was urgent then. I had no idea it was urgent.
Suppose you had known it was urgent. What would you have done?
I would have taken more risks.
You must have been painfully aware of the fact that there were not enough boats there to care for that large passenger list, were you not?
Yes, sir.
From what you've said, you discriminated entirely in the interest of the passengers, first the women and children, in filling these lifeboats?
Yes, sir.
Why did you do that? Because of the captain's orders or because of the rule of the sea?
The rule of human nature.
There must have been 2,000 people there on that part, the unsubmerged part of the boat?
All the engineers and other men and many of the firemen were down below and never came on deck.
They never came on deck?
No, sir. They were never seen. That would reduce it by a great number.
After the impact, did you hear any explosion of any kind?
I was sucked down, and I was blown out with something pretty powerful when the ship went down.
After the ship went down?
Yes.
Just describe a little more fully. You were sucked down?
I was sucked down against the blower, first of all. As I say, I was on top of the officers' quarters, and there was nothing more to be done. The ship then took a dive, and I was turned face forward and also took a dive.
From the side?
From the top, practically midships, a little to the starboard side, and I was driven back against the blower. But there is a grating there, and it was against this grating that I was sucked by the water and held there.
Was your head above water?
No, sir.
You were underwater?
Yes, sir. And then this explosion, or whatever it was, took place. Certainly I think it was the boilers exploded. There was a terrific blast of air and water, and I was blown out clear.
At least you took your head out of the water?
I came up above the water. Yes.
And how far from the sinking ship did it throw you?
Barely threw me away at all, because I went down against these fiddly gratings immediately abreast of the funnel over the stock hole.
Was anybody else sucked down at that time?
Colonel Gracie, I believe, was sucked down in identically the same manner.
How did you get released from that?
Oh, I don't know, sir. I think it was the boilers again, but I do not remember. I do not know.
Where did you next find yourself?
Alongside of that raft.
Where?
Alongside of that upturned boat that had been launched on the other side.
What other officers besides yourself survived?
The 3rd, 4th, and 5th, sir.